I have duct tape and I have pillows.
Right.
And I have guns.
Not constructive possession.
Not constructive possession. Not attempts.
We are the armed attorneys. Today, we're talking about a couple of things with regard to the final rule on stabilizing braces going to effect now. We're kind of playing whack-a-mole with questions as they arise in the comments section, and we think that this would be a great overview to explain what is constructive possession. So we're going to be talking about the NFA, what it actually criminalizes, how constructive possession works and constructive intent works, and then we're going to be talking about incomplete crimes, inchoate crimes, preparatory offenses, because that's how these kind of concepts are kind of mixed together. And you have to understand all of it in order to kind of stay on the right side of the law. But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And to understand this, we have to break it out, I think, into three parts, talking about the NFA, what it criminalizes, talking about the constructive possession, and then talking about attempts. And I think without understanding those three things, I think people are going to be in the dark. So let's start with the first one in the NFA. What are we talking about?
Right. So we are talking about the National Firearms Act, which of course was passed in the early 1930s, if my memory serves, and criminalizes the possession of scary, what were at the time mobster weapons. That's our machine guns, that's your short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns, suppressors, any other weapons, which is a grab bag of weapons with other characteristics, basically firearms that don't look like firearms, pistols with vertical foregrips, some other items here and there. But so we have the National Firearms Act, which says these items are illegal unless properly registered with the federal government, a tax paid, and a tax stamp possessed for said item. So basically, it's our legal gun registry for certain items in the country. So why does this matter? Because if you possess one of these items without said tax stamp, you are committing a federal crime, and in many states also a state crime, because lots of states like to link that to federal law. But let's talk about federal law. So you are committing a federal offense if you possess, let's say, a short barrel rifle without it being properly registered and a tax paid.
Yeah.
So why do we care now?
Well, because we have tens of millions of gun owners potentially becoming subject to this rule change from the ATF starting May the 31st.
Week.
Yeah, May the 31st, 2023. So, and why that's important, because a violation of the National Firearms Act could result in confinement up to 10 years and up to a $250,000 fine. So very serious penalties. Now, what does the government have to prove when prosecuting someone for violating the National Firearms Act? They have to prove that the person possessed the firearm, that they knew the firearm's physical characteristics, and that the firearm wasn't registered pursuant to the NFA, like Emily talked about. Now, why this is coming up now? Well, pistol arm braces. The ATF flip-flop, changed its mind, said, hey, these things that were good for decades, we're now considering these short-barreled rifles. And going forward, these things, they have to be registered, or you can't be possessing them in their current configurations. There's several compliance options. We have a video on that. We'll link that in the description below. Now, something that has come up, and I love to see this, when a new term enters the lexicon of the community, and talking about the Second Amendment community, constructive possession. That's a brand new phrase that is getting thrown around a lot, and I think I don't know that there's been an adequate explanation.
Correct. And this matters because we told you in our last video, and we stand by it and believe it wholeheartedly, that you are in compliance with the new rule by simply removing your arm brace from your AR AK pistol, period. So that begs the question, if I have just disconnected these items, at what point do I have constructive possession or an intent to possess or attempted possession of an unregistered short barrel rifle? For example, I simply disconnect them, throw them in the same range bag, and throw the range bag in my car and go to the range. Have I continued to possess that short barrel rifle because I am I'm committing essentially an inchoate crime, right?
Yeah.
Well, so I guess let's back up even from there. So that's why this all matters. Richard, what is an inchoate crime and why are they stupid?
So it's a preparatory offense. That
Yes.
means that a person, beyond mere preparation, they have taken affirmative steps that would demonstrate that they're going to commit a crime. And the policy theory behind this is we don't want people to complete a crime before, we can slap the cuffs on them. We want to stop them before the crime occurs.
Your conspiracies, your attempts, your, you know, uh, one step above thought crime. I personally am not a big fan of inchoate crimes. As a criminal defense attorney, I believe that you have either crimed or you have not. And I don't really care for the attempt, but here we are. So,
Yeah, but the two concepts are mixed together, and so we'll focus on constructive possession just for a moment, and then we will go on to these preparatory offenses. But when we're talking about constructive possession, it's because, and this makes sense in law, we would have folks who would say, I wasn't possessing that, therefore I'm not committing a crime. All right,
mhm.
that's that at its most simple level. That's what we're talking
You
about.
don't always find the drugs in the butthole, right?
Oh gosh,
No, but honestly, right? I mean, sometimes you have to allege constructive
yeah.
possession.
No, but we don't possess all of our belongings at one point in time. You got your car, I'm sure, parked out on the street or in your
Mhm.
driveway, but you are going to be held responsible for the things inside of your car. That's what we're talking about with constructive possession, because we can't hold on to everything all at once. And I mean, I have had those cases when I was a prosecutor where somebody would be possessing drugs and say, "Hey, these aren't my pants." Not a persuasive argument. But when you become more remote from the person, let's say they own a structure in a different part of town,
Mhm.
or they have a storage unit. Well, I mean, we're still going to hold the person responsible if there is contraband inside that structure or inside that storage unit. The government's going to hold that person responsible. Now, this all goes to prove the mental state of the person that they knowingly possessed.
Right.
It doesn't go to the underlying crime itself, because knowingly possessing all kinds of stuff. And let's say I have a storage unit, but if the stuff isn't a crime, does it really matter if I know that I'm possessing it or not?
No.
No. And I think that's what kind of we need to circle back to and talk about with regard to the possession of an unregistered SBR, because we talked about those things the government has to prove. Now, it still has to be a crime itself.
Yes, correct. So we have a good example of what it means to constructively possess an NFA item. There's a case on point, United States versus White, in which police located a short barrel shotgun in a duffel bag. White said basically, "That's not my duffel
Yeah, it's
bag.
his
I had
parents'
no
house. I don't
idea."
go there.
Yes. And essentially, the government has to say, all right, even though you weren't actually holding the short barrel rifle, or excuse me, the short barrel shotgun when we found you, you had constructive possession. And we have to show that the evidence is sufficient to show that you knew what was in that bag, that it is yours. And the court, actually gives us a nice little tight quote on point. Knowing possession may be actual or constructive. Constructive possession requires that the defendant has dominion over the premises where the firearm is located, or control, ownership, or dominion over the firearm itself. Constructive possession may be established by circumstantial evidence alone, but the government must show a sufficient nexus between the defendant and the firearm. So I can think of lots of examples, right? The unregistered NFA item is in my home. Good example.
That's constructive possession.
Constructive possession, even if I'm like, I didn't know that was there. If it is in my embroidered bag with my name on it, right? And they find that bag in my office here, right? Lots of people have access to my office. It's
Right.
in my embroidered bag with my initials. Damn, I love of monograms. But there are lots and lots of examples of this kind of behavior where you're looking at circumstantial evidence, and yet, as stewards of the law, we know that circumstantial evidence, as much as we might hate it, is enough to persuade a jury in many, many instances. So you can think of a million examples where this would apply.
And remember, this is all with the assumption that the item is unlawful or contraband. So, me having an unregistered NFA item in my house, could you be convicted of possession? Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. But again, that's the underlying assumption that the item is contraband.
But here we are in a different situation, and it requires a slightly different analysis,
Yeah, so
right?
that's constructive possession right there.
Yes.
All right, different concept.
Yes. So now we have, right? You have your arm brace and your AR pistol attached. That is a short barrel rifle. And if it is not registered, then you are committing a criminal offense. However, you disconnect said brace from said pistol. You now have two legal items. And so it is only an unregistered NFA item if those two legal items can be shown, again, probably by circumstantial evidence, that you have the intent, essentially, to possess it as a short barrel rifle. It's a lot. These concepts are complicated.
And they're interwoven.
They're interwoven. I mean, you can probably tell by the way we're sort of struggling here to pull them apart and explain them clearly how interwoven and complicated this is. But so that's our next step now. So both pieces are in your home. Arm brace in your home, AR pistol in your home. How now does the government prove that it was an attempted possession of an SBR?
Yeah, that's where we get to our inchoate crimes. But with those two items separate, if the only thing we were looking at is the concept of constructive possession alone, that wouldn't be a crime. But that's why we have to go on to these inchoate offenses, incomplete offenses, preparatory offenses.
Because you're going to have constructive possession and attempted assembly. I mean, essentially, right?
Exactly right.
Or attempted unlawful possession. So it's a lot. Now, I really like the comparison here. And I know that all of my Google searching this morning got me on some sort of list. But I really like the comparison here between possessing this sort of unregistered SBR and assembling an improvised explosive device. So why do I like that possession? Because I had to look up a lot of the things that go into an improvised explosive device, which is why, like, if the FBI is watching, I'm not making one. We're talking about it in a video. It's all lawful items for the most part, right? I mean, I can make a bomb out of lawful items. So at what point do those things become an IED, or do I have I committed the offense of, the attempt to assemble an IED, which I will be prosecuted for? Same analysis. And so you can sort of think about it in the same way. We have actually a great example of this as well. It just exists on the Department of Justice website, talking about a prosecution from about a decade ago of a gentleman here in Texas who was attempting to assemble an IED. And there were lots of circumstantial things, right? In addition to his possession of otherwise lawful items, he had emailed himself a list of names for targets. He had,
posted on social media swearing eternal hostility against the infidels.
Exactly right. So, it puts us, though, in this situation of you've got the two lawful items. What is the circumstantial evidence that's going to prove your intent? And one, and I think this is the one that most people focus on, is proximity.
Right. Yeah, proximity is a good one. The ability to quickly reattach. Those are some other factors. If you're saying, let's say you post on social media, let's say the police find these things separated apart, but they see you just posted on Facebook with these two things assembled, maybe they can't prove that you were in unlawful possession at that time, but that might go towards your intent. We're showing lack of mistake, showing opportunity.
They're both in your range bag in the trunk of your car, and you're driving to the range.
Yeah.
Great circumstantial evidence, right?
Yeah, but I think a lot of people are getting really hung up on the term constructive possession. Just those two items by themselves separated, that's not constructive possession. That's not what we're talking about. What we're really talking about is intent to possess an unregistered NFA item. That's really when I think people are saying that term, that's what I really think they are meaning. And what, to Emily's point, though there are some things the government would have to prove your intent to commit this crime.
Right.
And so how do we show that? With all that circumstantial evidence that we just talked about.
Your comments on this channel that say, I will not comply. I mean, I know we don't like to hear that, but
just say algorithm instead.
Yes. But it can be lots of things that the government could put together. And ultimately, this is a subjective question, whether or not you attempted to assemble that SBR. And it's a subjective question that your jury will be asked to assemble. And you're going to have to be the guy. There's some guy out there, and I have this picture in my head of I've got my AR pistol in one hand and my arm brace in the other hand, and I'm looking at an ATF agent, and I'm like,
la 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 la.
How close is too? Like at kids when they're like, I'm not touching you, Richard. I'm not touching you, Richard.
Yeah.
How close is too close? How much do you need to try to prove this subjective concept to the jury that I had this intent to assemble. And we don't know the answer because it's going to vary based upon what jury you have.
But I would say, and to pour a little bit of water on the fire a little bit,
Oh, come on.
we have, think about this. You can buy less than 16-inch barrels online. You can
Mhm.
buy short stocks. You can buy
Mhm.
all this stuff. Thousands of people do that every single year, maybe even tens of thousands. And guess what? They're not charged with
No,
constructive possession of an unregistered SBR. Maybe they intend to make their own gun,
no.
and register it lawfully with the NFA. So there has to be some evidence to show the intent to commit the crime.
Right. Well, I mean, how many people, and this happens all the time, you've got an AR, you buy your short barrel, you possess both of them in your home, and you submit your Form 1 and you patiently wait for the ATF to give you permission to assemble it.
Yeah.
You're not committing a crime in the interim, right? So, I mean, that happens all the time. So, just being in possession of both items does not a crime make. Proximity alone does not a crime make. Proximity goes into good evidence, but there is lots there that we have to think about. And practically speaking, the chances that the government serves a warrant on you for your one thing when you have not done anything else wrong, like, I I mean, I guess I can't tell you it won't happen, but
Well, I mean, I don't know what shows more intent to comply with the final rule than removing the brace prior to May the 31st and separating those items. Like that's, it
yes.
goes this intent stuff goes both ways.
Mhm.
But I think people need to take a deep breath, and I understand the fear of the federal government,
Yes.
but just possession of the items alone, I can't imagine a court is not going to find a sufficiency of the evidence based on that. If you intend to commit a crime, you intend to possess an unregistered SBR, that is a crime. And if you take steps in preparations for that, that's going to be a crime.
Right.
But if your intent is to not possess an unregistered SBR, you're not committing a crime.
No. I mean, there's just 1,000 examples of this.
Yeah.
As we're sitting here talking, I'm thinking about, like, if you tape a bunch of pillows to the barrel of your gun, you have made an unlawful suppressor. You know that. You have manufactured an unlawful NFA item. I have duct tape and I have pillows
Right.
and I have guns.
Not constructive possession.
Not constructive possession, not attempt. So, I mean, just it takes a lot of common sense, and a little bit of legal knowledge, and then a lot of, crystal balling in terms of what a jury would do. But there are just 1,000 examples.
Yeah. But we hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And as always, question and comment for us below. And until next time, we're the armed attorneys.